soon as it reaches sub 5% interest rate, it's going to light the fuse.
Yeah, you're going to get that
and that's
frenzy.
probably what they're worried about.
I would be worried about it. I am worried about it, and not because I don't want us all to have nice things. I really, really do, and I know that we need it. But the frenzy that will ensue will counter everything that we've been trying to achieve.
I'm Mehran Zareian.
And I'm Glenn Stanley.
And this is Property Espresso. Another OCR.
Another OCR drop. It was a goodie. It was another goodie.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite as good as it could have been, maybe. I'll refrain from saying should have been, because the sentiment has changed over the last 6 or so weeks. We've been able to see the impact that the last reduction has had. That being 0.5% back in, when was it, 6 weeks ago. It's flowed through now. Things have settled down. The banks have vied for possession. But now we've got another one. It suggests that we're tracking in the right direction. These cuts are helping to bring and keep inflation back within its parameters. But perhaps still leaves the door a bit open for further cuts into 2025, which is great. We're not going to see another announcement now until...
It's interesting, in the run-up to it, there were some speculators saying it was going to come 0.75, and it was actually 0.5.
That's right.
What's your take on that?
Well, see, I was one of the fans waving the flag for the 0.75. I've seen a lot of people hurting as a result of these very high interest rates, and have been actively calling for hard and fast cuts. But as I said, over the last sort of 5 or 6 weeks, we've seen some people say, yes, it's going to be 75 basis points. And then others saying it might only be 25 basis points. Right. And others were pretty comfortable in the middle there, suggesting 0.5%.
They've still been a bit conservative with the rate increase, or reduction for the loans.
Yes.
Considering that it's come down again, do you think they would have brought it down in relation?
That's been a topic of hot conversation in the office today. So many of our clients, we've been recommending hold off doing anything with their mortgages until after yesterday, being after the next OCR announcement. So they're calling us at 9 o'clock this morning saying, right, fix. It's generally about a week or two until we've actually seen the new lay of the land. BNZ, for instance, came out with a rate cut ahead of the OCR announcement. The OCR was announced, and then we saw, I think ASB came very, very quickly with their cuts, but they're not sweeping and across the board, and they will change. There will be further adjustments. You'll probably find that some bank that maybe hasn't moved yet will bring out an amazing online special or a headline interest rate for one specific term, which causes all the competitors to go, oh, we may have to realign as well. So yes, as much as the cash rate has come down, things are good. It is the sun is shining again. There is still some time before things settle.
Certainly a lot of caution, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think a little bit is probably to do with the American elections and the way that went.
It's massive.
And we don't know what's going to happen going forward.
Absolutely not.
And you can only speculate with that respect. But also, I guess, from the bank's perspective, they don't want to do anything long term until they're certain what's going to happen in the next 6 months.
That's absolutely right. I mean, bear in mind, and it is important to remember, that the OCR, the official cash rate, generally dictates or drives pricing in the short-term fixed and floating rates. So it's not unusual for the cash rate to move by 0.5% and then to see the floating rates move by that same amount. You may also see some of the shorter-term fixed rates, the 6, 12, 18-month, move by a similar amount to the cash rate move, but probably the 3, 4 and 5 year rates, those longer terms, which are driven by interbank swap rates, offshore haggling between major players, that isn't affected as much by these cash rate announcements. Now, that's not entirely true. If we look at what the banks have done in the last sort of 24 hours, most of them have cut most of their rates. There are still 1 or 2 outliers. Some of the smaller local banks are possibly still trying to work out what they're going to do. But by and large, most banks have cut most of their rates. I just think that there may be more to come over the next sort of 10 days or so.
Yeah. Well, certainly the market has picked up, both for loans and for property sales. The number of properties coming to the market is higher than it was last year.
Great.
They're not selling for much of a difference as far as the median price. Median price has only gone up slightly compared to what it was last year.
Right.
And that's because it went up, then it came down, and it's just correcting itself again.
Right.
And from that aspect, I guess things are moving. Prices aren't going to shift up dramatically until there's a shortage, because there's a whole load of new properties coming on the market as well, new builds.
Yes.
And so there's more competition between vendors. And from that aspect, this side of Christmas, properties are turning over because people buy and sell in the same market.
Yep.
However, prices aren't dramatically going up unless it's a remarkable property. As I mentioned to you, there's one that we sold recently, and there were 8 bidders in the room, 3 on the phone, and pre-auction offer of 1.4, sold for 1.59.
That's great, isn't it?
If it's a remarkable type of property and people really want it and there's competition, the price will go up. For a standard property that's standard 3-bedroom in a good suburb, the price isn't going to be much higher than it was a couple of months ago.
Do you find the FOMO of buyers changes the more they miss out, i.e. Of the 11 people that were vying for that one property, only one got it. That's 10 people that lost, they missed out. Do you think, do you tend to find a different approach the next time they find a property? Do you think they'll be a little bit more serious and maybe suffer that regret of not paying that extra $1,000 sort of thing?
There's certainly, in the last month or so, a lot more pre-auction offers coming in. People are acting, you're quite right, people are acting a lot quicker. And part of that reasoning, I guess, is that if they're spending money, say $700, $800 on a building inspection, and they don't get the property, over and over again they're spending money on something that's not eventuating into a sale. So from that aspect, I guess people are acting quicker if it's the right property for them.
Certainly, with the first home buyers that I work with, oftentimes, now I'm not here to tell you what to pay for a property, but the conversations there'll be a bit of back and forth, and my advice is always, well, certainly at an auction, you're going to have to put your best foot forward. With a pre-auction offer, you're going to have to put your best foot forward, but perhaps keep some in the tank for any competition that there may be out there. But what I tend to find is a pre-approval is valid for 3 months, and we'll then extend it. And as we keep extending these things, I think people start to realize, wow, the house that I missed out on 6 months ago because I wasn't prepared to pay an extra $5,000 for it has already gone up in value by 30 grand. Maybe we're getting back to those times where we almost have to pay tomorrow's price in order to secure the property today.
Yeah. You're quite right there. You're very right. And when you look back at how the house prices have gone up over the last 10 years, if people had bought 10 years ago and they're selling now, they've made an immediate profit. It's doubled in value. If you bought 6 months ago and you would sell now, you're probably making enough to pay for that commission.
Maybe.
That's the sort of range you're looking at.
You're absolutely right. And to your earlier point where you said property prices had done that and then they did this and now they're at about there, I've often found that human nature is to want to know the value of the thing that we bought. So we buy a house, and I, for one, will check its value on quotable value or on a homes.co or whatever, one roof. Keep on following it on this microscopic level. It's doing this and it's terrifying. I've made money. I've lost money. I've made it back. But again, you zoom out over 10, 20, 30, 40 years and it's consistent.
I would say that I'd use a bit of caution when you're checking your price on something like homes.co or one of those sites, because You could have two houses next to each other,
Yep.
and they could have different values. And you think to yourself, why is that the case? Somebody might have added to the value of their property by landscaping.
Sure.
So I guess from that aspect, you've got to be really cautious.
Oh,
and
these
you've got to
things
look
are-
at what has truly sold in the last 3 months in that area.
Absolutely. And therein lies the problem. What sold last week or the week before but hasn't quite settled yet isn't in the data.
No.
You're dealing with old data. It's a computer algorithm simply taking the square meter of that house in that postcode and comparing it with what things have sold relative to their CV within a 5K range. It's not an exact science.
No.
And that's sort of what I was alluding to. My recommendation to anyone buying a house, certainly for the first time, is try not to sort of have that hawkish look at what it's worth. Just trust the process and know that, over the course of time, that house is going to be going up in value.
You can't afford to overanalyze.
No.
And from that aspect, you've got to really act to the extent of what you're willing to pay for it, not what somebody else is willing to pay for it.
Correct.
Otherwise, you are in that competitive auction type setting.
Yes.
And multiple offers are happening more and more now
Yes.
as well. And that's the worst position to be in, because you don't know what the other person's bidding.
No, that's right.
It's a sealed envelope and it goes to the highest bidder or best conditions in that case.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be in that situation. So if you can act quickly and you've done all your research and had the right advice, act. You're quite right.
Absolutely. One thing that I have mentioned in our previous chats, Mehran, when the cash rate comes down, is around that test rate. So that the test rate, or notional interest rates, being the rate at which a bank assesses your ability to meet your repayments. We've seen, again, most of the banks, not all of them, but this only being 24 hours, have dropped their test rates. Some have done so immediately, and others have said, we'll do it from Monday. So I've one application in with a bank at the moment, and it's tight. It is tight, and we've been working it over the course of about 2 weeks now, trying to get it to work. And we're not quite there, and my suggestion to that lender was just hold it until Monday and then tell me if it still doesn't work. The test rate has come down by about 0.5%. That is going to increase how much anyone can borrow. It can't not. There's no exact science as to how much more someone can borrow, because it will be based on their income and how that's composed, whether there's overtime and bits and pieces. But this lowering test rate will mean that people can once again borrow more next week than they potentially could today. So just a little tip to anyone out there that has recently been talking to their bank and has recently been told this is the most that you can borrow because of your incomes. It may be worth revisiting that over the next week or so.
And since our last talk, I've been giving that advice to people.
Great.
And people have been acting on it.
Great.
And they've come back to me and said, oh, yeah, I can't believe that I got more money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's there. It's not something that anyone's going to actively advertise. You're not going to see an ad on TV saying, "Oh, yeah, reapply if you've already been to us. We'll have another go at it." But yeah, it's well worth noting. It is well worth noting.
It's interesting though that we're very focused on New Zealand. When you look globally, it's an amazing amount of variance across countries as to the house price index. Unbelievably, Egypt, 44% in 1 year. Unbelievable.
That's incredible.
And then you've got China and Hong Kong, which are on negative.
Right.
India is on about 3%. New Zealand is on just over 1.5%.
Right. Yep.
UK, 1.1% roughly. So we're on par with what's happening in the UK at the moment.
That is interesting.
Even the US is something like 4.5%.
Right.
But their expectation going forward for the next year is about 12% increase.
Sounds about right. Yeah. It's I mean, obviously, it would be amiss for us not to mention the US election, but things that have taken place following the outcome of that have thrown everyone. It's been. It's come from left field, I think, certainly for me, and trying to understand what that means for us here, and the wider global economy is, the jury's still out on that.
And although our market is very dependent on migration, and the migration level is low compared to what it used to be, money is likely to come in from outside of the country.
Absolutely.
Going forward. And, if things do open up for US residents or citizens to buy in New Zealand, that could open up a whole
It certainly could.
area.
Interestingly, I read an article around the DTIs, the debt to income ratios, that have been introduced, but to date don't really matter. Because the test rates have been so high, no one's been able to borrow more than about 6.5 times what they earn. In fact, we're generally only lending about 4.5 times. But that's starting to change now, and we're starting to see applicants, particularly investors, getting capped by these debt to income ratios. One of the comments in the blog that I was reading sort of said, that's fine and all because it affects investors, local investors who borrow to buy these investment properties, but what about the offshore buyers who just bring cash? They're still allowed to buy. So these debt to income ratios, they're a tool, but they're actually going to be capping local contenders at the knees. There's still other active buyers out there. And to your point about, America, there will be a lot of Americans, rightly or wrongly, who no longer want to be in America, I would imagine, and New Zealand will be increasingly a very, very, very attractive bolt hole to escape to.
I've had a couple of buyers who are intending to put their money into New Zealand.
Right, yeah.
And they're from the US.
Right.
And it does make you wonder whether that is the thin end of the wedge. Going forward, if Australia has increased by 4.5%, are those buyers going to start buying in New Zealand again? There's been a bit of a shortage of Australian buyers coming over and buying. Singaporeans, I think I mentioned the last time, there seems to be a big uptake on the social media posts that I've been putting out in Singapore.
That's
so
interesting.
Again, because those citizens and residents can buy in New Zealand, there could potentially be a pot there as well going forward next year. So although we see the market as being fairly slow on the uptake at the moment, I think that could change quite rapidly next year. It's not just related to the interest rates. I think a lot more could be happening.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, locally, I became aware that up in Whangaparoa, Watercare, there's issues around resources, and there's basically going to be no more new builds going on for an indeterminate period of time now. They've got 4,000 active consents are all happening, but beyond that, they don't really have the infrastructure or something. So things like that, and when they feed through the media, there will be articles about this. They will be saying, there's no more houses. That's going to cause people to go, oh, crikey, then we better start doing something with the stock that we've got. I think for the last couple of years, buyers have had the upper hand to some extent, but that's starting to change now a wee bit. And as we talked about earlier, I think more and more buyers will start to get a bit sick and tired of missing out, and will start to get a little bit nervous of the sheer volume of competitor buyers at these open homes. Certainly, one real estate agent that I was talking to said that they'd had something like 27 groups through one of their open homes over the weekend, which was great, probably testament to the quality of the listing. But I think we'll be seeing more and more and more of that. Whereas 6 months or so ago, it was maybe 4 or 5 groups through.
A lot of first-time buyers who have been renting for quite a while are now coming through open homes with the view of getting on that property ladder.
Good.
And I haven't seen that happen for a couple of years. They've been looking at the low level, but now they're very determined to buy because they know if they don't buy now, they could miss the boat, and it'll be out of their range, out of their reach going forward.
Yeah, I think for first home buyers particularly, interest rates or the forecasts of interest rates are so pertinent These guys really have to dig deep and put all that they can into this purchase. They're stretched. Their budgets are stretched. It has to be that way, unfortunately, but they stretch themselves to the max. And so the premise that their interest rates could go up is enough to spook anyone. Hence, it pushes them into inaction.
Yep.
Now that we're being told, and rightly so, that interest rates ain't going up anymore. In fact, they're coming down. Right here and now is as bad as it's going to be for the foreseeable future. That just means that gives people comfort that, okay, I can commit to this for 6 months, and at the end of those 6 months, it's probably going to be cheaper.
Yeah, and that's a valid point, because there's that fine balance between, do I buy now at a high interest rate, or do I wait and watch the prices go up?
Yep.
And that 6 month period could be the period of time that they need to work that out.
You'll need to pay more, but at a lower interest rate. Is that? Look, hindsight's 2020. It's very, very easy in retrospect to go, oh, you know, that worked out well. I've often said, and it's probably been a while since I said it, interestingly, but I have often said that the best time to buy a house was yesterday. You know, tomorrow it's going to be even more expensive. You know, now's the time. That's my thoughts.
The competition is also from investors, and those investors are back.
Yes, they are.
And we're seeing more and more investors coming through properties asking about the rental appraisal, and we always provide a rental appraisal for any of our properties.
Great.
Because we know those investors are likely to look at that, to look at what the gain's going to be. I was looking at the figures for the last month, and the highest gains have been for three-bedroom properties in Birkenhead and OCR, because the prices are at that level where the rent is at a good value compared to the actual purchase price.
The yield's good, right?
Whereas you look at somewhere like Devonport, Morangey Bay, Murray's Bay, you're paying more of a premium because of the schools and the location, and you're not going to get that realised in the amount of rent that you're going to get.
No. So your passive rental income, your yield on that property will suffer in favour of potentially better capital gains over the long term. So oftentimes when I'm talking to a new or would-be investor, I'm talking about, you know, what is important to you. Are we generating a cash flow? Are you looking to flip the property on? You know, quick gains and on you go. You know, what exactly is it in an investment property that you're trying to achieve? Have you noticed disparity between investors looking at existing properties and new build properties or newly built properties?
Mainly existing properties.
Right.
New build properties, you would think that they would have healthy homes standards. I came across a couple of situations in the last few years where brand new property had been built, but it was built for somebody to buy and live in it. The actual size of the living area was open plan, and the size of the heat pump that had been put in, the rating was not sufficient to meet healthy home standards.
That's interesting, eh? That's very interesting.
So you've got to look at new homes with a wider view to what you're going to be using it for.
The reason I say that, Mehran, is that certainly from an investment point of view, with the LVR restrictions that came in, we can only borrow up to 70% of an investment property versus 80% of an owner-occupied property. A lot of would-be investors simply don't have enough leverageable equity in order to buy an existing rental property. One loophole or exception to that rule is new build, whereby the Reserve Bank has made an exception for anyone building new. You can borrow up to 90%, regardless of whether it's an investment or an owner-occupied property. And so I've been talking to some investors who we've worked the numbers, we've explored non-bank, which certainly does provide for more, but have come to accept that no, there's not a lot that we can do here because of the limited equity, unless we buy something off plans. And so that opens up a whole other raft of options for these people. They may have been looking in their locale, they may, like down the road, they know where they're looking, but suddenly you're going, What about a new build in Christchurch? And I'd never thought of that. Maybe, yeah. And it just opens up a whole nother conversation.
I guess if a property manager is managing the property on your behalf, it doesn't matter where it is, really, does it?
I've seen some exceptionally profitable and really well operating portfolios that span the breadth of the country. My clients haven't seen the house they own. It's been good investing. A lot of it comes from trying to avoid concentration risk. So it's not necessarily advisable to own 8 apartments within the same complex, because if there is an event at the complex, they're all affected by it. So we talk about, de-risking and trying to spread your investments, not all your eggs in one basket. So building new in Tauranga or in Dunedin or Christchurch and having your bulk hold, your owner-occupied property up here, does have some merit to it, not just to sort of capitalise and grow, but there is a risk aversion tactic at play as well.
That ripple effect that we had in 2015 to 2017, where people were selling up in Auckland, they were then moving down to Tauranga or further down south and maximising on their gains. That's likely to happen again once the Auckland market picks up. People will start moving out of Auckland again and transferring that money to another location.
It's cyclical, isn't it?
And that is likely to happen going north here as well, towards Warkworth, Matakana.
Well, the roading is certainly finally coming together, and absolutely opening up a whole lot of just ideas for people who I think formerly had, and for the last 5 or 6 years had felt trapped in their bubbles. That we're here, we work here, this is where we are, we can't move around here. Things are only going to get more expensive. We need to just pause and reflect. It's been tough times. You remove that, it'll take a while before people trust that it is indeed behind us, but then they're going to start looking forward at the next chapter of their lives, which often I think won't necessarily involve the house that they're in, or even we talk about kids moving out, and suddenly, do we want to live in school zone? You don't have to anymore.
No, that's right. And I guess for those people that are at that stage of life where they want to go into a retirement village.
That's right.
That's the other key thing, that a lot of people are in that position, and they're being very, very selective of what they do as far as the sale of their property. Because they know once they move into a retirement village, it's almost like a one-way street.
It very much is. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. We've helped a number of a couple of retirees getting into retirement villages without actually selling their property. There are ways and means around it in some cases, depending on your situation, but potentially leveraging or renting out the owner-occupied property, getting tenants in there in order to supplement the income, the pension, other bits and pieces sufficient to borrow against that property and buy over here. Because you can't borrow against a property in a retirement village.
No.
They're not freehold, the titles will not allow for it. But yes, we can leverage against another in order to do that.
I guess the other way would be if somebody needed to release that money to sell their family home that they've been living in for 30, 40 years. It's going to have a very high value compared to what they paid for it at the beginning, and downsize to something that they could then rent out.
Correct, absolutely.
And then move into the
absolutely. In fact, that's what my mum ended up doing when she moved into a retirement village. She sold her house. She bought an apartment in Auckland, which would allow her to occupy it when she came up here on visits. But then, with the rest of the proceeds, was able to get into a lovely retirement village outside of Auckland.
I think it's worth doing your research and having that conversation with Glenn, because if you are in that position, it may be worth looking at the financial side of things.
I feel that my role isn't to tell you what to do so much as give you the information you need to make an informed decision.
Yeah. And if you need me to sell your house, hey.
That's brilliant.
nobody can predict what's going to happen
No.
in the new year. All we can assume is that things are going to get better. The next OCR review, and it's also the monetary review as well. So I guess we will know nearer the time whether it's going to come down another 0.5.
Yes.
It depends on what happens with the markets going forward in the next few weeks.
As I said, I think in our last interview, Mehran, I had predicted 0.75, and I think I'd even mentioned a sub 5% interest rate by Christmas. Now, I think realistically a sub 5% rate by Christmas may have been on the cards had we seen 0.75%. We have now, as of this morning, there is a sub 5% interest rate.
Really?
But there's hooks attached. It is available for only for people building new. It's an exceptional rate, and if anyone is building new, you would be hard pressed to look past it. Give me a call if you are and you want to discuss. So I think I can say, yep, we got a sub 5% interest rate. I'm going to put a tick next to that claim. I was possibly a little bit overzealous at 0.75, but I'm glad that we saw that 0.5%. I think that the data that will be available to the Reserve Bank when it convenes to discuss the MPS and the next OCR will be somewhat limited. It always is around this time of year. We've a break for Christmas. Things are a bit clunky and lumpy, and there'll be a rush to push settlements through up until the 20th, and then it gets a bit hairy from there. So I don't know that we're going to see such vigor in their cuts. I'm probably going to pick, at this point, I'm probably going to suggest 25 basis points rather than another 50. Okay. But that's probably more on the back of what we saw yesterday being a little bit more conservative than what I'd hoped for.
Yeah, there's still a lot of caution out there. I know in the US, I heard somebody say the other day that as soon as it reaches sub 5% interest rate, it's going to light the fuse.
Yeah, you're going to get that.
And that's
frenzy.
probably what they're worried about.
I would be worried about it. I am worried about it, and not because I don't want us all to have nice things. I really, really do, and I know that we need it, but the frenzy that will ensue will counter everything that we've been trying to achieve and then cause more longer-term pain.
Yep.
And I don't want that. We really can't be dealing with that.
And that's probably why in New Zealand and UK we haven't seen that gain over the last 12 months, because there's been that cautionary step forward, step by step to get there,
100%.
Rather than sudden surge and then regret.
Yep. You have to remember that when the Reserve Bank dropped the interest rates, dropped the cash rate in 2019, 2020, it was a reactive response to an unprecedented shock. It had to happen now. And that's fine to an extent. But when they then raised the interest rates, that's to stop us from getting too carried away. So that again was measured. It was always going to be that when we got to the top of the curve, that's where you get sort of dovish and you start to wait and just watch. There's no rush to drop them down. Well, there wasn't back in August until all of a sudden there was, because that data about unemployment started coming through and Reserve Bank became privy and aware of the wider spread implications of their inaction. So suddenly we started seeing rapid and successive cuts. I think that once the banks all settled down, and bearing in mind that a lot of people are still fixed at whatever interest rate they locked in at 6-12 months ago, so they're not even going to be feeling the positive impact of these lower rates yet. The Reserve Bank will be mindful of that. If it keeps dropping and people are still fixed at higher interest rates, there's no litmus test.
Yep.
So there will be an easing of the cuts, but I don't think we're quite at the bottom of the curve yet. No. Far from it.
Yeah. 2025, what's your pick?
I think we've been saying this for a while now, but I think we're all going to get rather busy I really do think we're going to get rather busy. I think house prices are going to go up. I think there's going to be a resurgence of the whole investor versus first home buyer debate that ensues. Politics will get involved. I think one thing that people need to be aware of is right now many banks are committing to assessing an application no sooner than 12 days after we submit it. There's a long wait line, and I think that's going to get worse before it gets better. So my suggestion for 2025 is get ready. If you're wanting to do something, get approved to do it, and just stay on top of that approval. Keep on your advisor, keep on your bank, or better get someone that will proactively walk you through that, and just keep an eye out and stay active in the market.
That's good advice, and I think over that whole Christmas, New Year period, we normally see people just chill out and not take any action. I think there are still going to be buyers out there who will continue to look, and if they've got their pre-approval, they can buy without the competition.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. There will be deals being done every day. It's whether or not you'll be part of that deal or not is up to you.
Yep. Okay, Glenn. Well, thank you very much again.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. I do enjoy it.
And we'll be back in 2025. In the meantime, have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.